Imagine a future where year after year the population of the United States continues to shrink. This isn't a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, steady decline. Fewer children are born. Immigration levels fall. People age, retire, and pass on without enough young people to replace them. The trend persists across decades, quietly transforming the foundations of American life. While this may sound like a distant or unlikely scenario, many developed nations, including Japan and some European countries, are already facing versions of this reality. But what if it happens to the United States, the world's largest economy, a global military power, and a cultural superhub? The initial effects would be subtle. With fewer births each year, the demand for maternity wards, pediatric services, and childcare would decline. Schools would slowly consolidate or close altogether. Toy companies would notice declining sales. This wouldn't be seen as a crisis at first. It might even be welcomed by some as a relief from overpopulation fears. Urban planners might celebrate having fewer cars on the road. Environmentalists might cheer for the reduced carbon footprint. But beneath this initial calm, deeper and more destabilizing forces would begin to stir. One of the first sectors to feel the weight of a declining population would be the labor market. The American workforce is built on a pyramid. A large base of young workers supports a smaller group of retirees. But if the base shrinks, the entire pyramid becomes unstable. With fewer people entering the workforce each year, companies would struggle to find employees. Wages might rise initially as firms compete for scarce talent, but productivity would start to suffer. Many industries, especially those dependent on physical labor such as agriculture, manufacturing, logistics, and service work, would be hit hardest. There simply wouldn't be enough people to do the jobs. Technology might offer temporary relief. Automation, artificial intelligence, and robotics could replace some of the human labor shortage. But not all roles can be automated. Human touch, empathy, and creativity are still critical in fields like healthcare, education, and the arts. Moreover, the infrastructure to automate takes time and capital investment, and not every business would be able to afford it. Next comes the economic growth engine. The U.S. economy thrives on expansion. More people earning wages, spending money, taking out mortgages, buying goods, and paying taxes. If population declines year after year, consumer demand drops. Companies scale back. Entire sectors contract. Fewer people mean fewer customers, fewer innovators, and fewer taxpayers. Gross domestic product, GDP, would start to stagnate or even decline. The stock market might become more volatile, with fewer investors participating and companies reporting slower growth. Real estate markets would shift dramatically. Cities that were once booming might start to feel eerily empty. Housing prices could fall as demand dwindles. With more homes than people to fill them, urban decay might spread. Infrastructure would remain, but without enough tax revenue or citizens to maintain it, roads, bridges, and public utilities could deteriorate. Once vibrant communities would begin to resemble ghost towns. Rural areas would be hit even harder, becoming increasingly deserted. The housing sector isn't the only casualty. The healthcare system would undergo a dramatic transformation. A shrinking population almost always means an aging population, particularly if birth rates remain low and immigration is curbed. This would place enormous pressure on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Fewer workers contributing to payroll taxes would be supporting more retirees drawing benefits. The imbalance could bankrupt these systems or require drastic cuts in benefits, tax hikes, or both. Hospitals and elder care facilities would be overwhelmed, not because there are too many people, but because there are too few caregivers. Higher education institutions would also face a reckoning. With fewer college-age students, many universities, especially smaller ones, would be forced to close or merge. Tuition revenue would fall, faculty positions would shrink, college towns could decline economically. America's status as a global education leader could diminish as fewer international students are allowed in, or fewer are interested in a country in demographic decline. Geopolitically, a shrinking U.S. population would send ripples across the world. America's military strength partially depends on its human capital, both in numbers and in talent. A smaller population means fewer recruits, fewer engineers, and fewer defense contractors. Maintaining a global military presence would become more difficult and more expensive. Rival nations could take advantage of the vacuum left behind. In terms of soft power, the United States might also lose its cultural dominance. The music, film, technology, and fashion industries that once defined global trends could shrink without a dynamic young population to fuel their creativity. Immigration has long played a vital role in refreshing the American identity, bringing in new ideas, perspectives, and entrepreneurial energy. A population decline driven by stricter immigration policies could accelerate cultural stagnation. Politically, the demographics of decline would shift voting patterns. Older populations tend to vote more conservatively, while younger generations lean progressive. With fewer young voters, political discourse might shift rightward. Issues like climate change, student debt, and digital privacy could lose political momentum. Meanwhile, policies focused on healthcare, pensions, and elder care would dominate the national conversation. Family structures would evolve. With fewer children per household and more single-person homes, the nature of community would change. Loneliness and social isolation could increase. Mental health problems might rise as people age with fewer social connections. The decline in extended family structures would strain informal caregiving networks. Businesses would also need to adapt. Advertising would shift from youth-centered branding to products and services catering to older adults. Fitness, travel, and tech would be reimagined for seniors. Retailers might shrink their physical footprints, and online services would need to accommodate less tech-savvy users. Even the entertainment industry would reflect this shift, creating more content aimed at older audiences. Government response to this demographic transformation would be critical. If managed poorly, the consequences could be catastrophic. But with the right policies, the decline could be softened. Strategies might include expanding legal immigration, incentivizing childbirth with tax credits, subsidizing childcare, and creating family-friendly work policies. Nations like France, Sweden, and Japan have experimented with such methods with mixed success. The US would need to learn from these experiences quickly. Another potential solution would be to rethink the economy entirely. Growth-centric models might be replaced with sustainability-focused approaches. Smaller populations don't have to mean collapse if productivity per person increases, or if quality of life becomes the new national metric. The economy could pivot to one based on well-being, education, environmental protection, and technological innovation. Environmental consequences of population decline would be mixed. On one hand, fewer people could mean lower emissions, reduced urban sprawl, and less strain on resources like water and food. On the other hand, a declining population might also mean reduced investment in green technology, especially if tax revenues dry up. Climate change would not stop simply because there are fewer Americans. Global cooperation would remain essential. Culturally, some might see a silver lining. With less hustle, less overcrowding, and more available space, the American lifestyle might become calmer. People could live in less densely populated areas, commute less, and reconnect with nature. Art and philosophy might flourish in quieter, more reflective times. But this idealized version depends heavily on equitable access to resources, something that demographic decline does not guarantee. On the global economic stage, a shrinking US population could tilt the balance of power. Emerging economies with younger, growing populations, such as India, Nigeria, or Indonesia, might rise in influence. American companies could struggle to compete globally. The dollar's dominance could weaken, and foreign investors might look elsewhere for opportunity. Multinational corporations headquartered in the US might begin to shift operations abroad to chase younger markets. The psychological impact on national identity cannot be underestimated. America has long seen itself as a land of growth, opportunity, and endless upward mobility. A shrinking population challenges that myth. National pride could erode. Anxiety and uncertainty might rise, leading to reactionary politics or cultural retreat. People might resist globalism even more, clinging to nostalgia and isolationism. Religious institutions, often dependent on families and youth for participation, would likely suffer declining attendance. Community organizations might struggle to stay relevant. Volunteerism could fall. A sense of civic engagement could diminish, replaced by individualism and disengagement. But not everything is doom and gloom. Some communities might thrive in this new reality. Smaller towns could reinvent themselves as hubs of sustainable living. Artists, thinkers, and entrepreneurs might flock to areas where housing is cheap and opportunity is what you make of it. There could be a renaissance in rural America, led not by corporations or politicians, but by people willing to experiment with new ways of living. Moreover, technology might save the day. Telemedicine, remote work, virtual education, and AI-driven services could offset many effects of population loss. Robots might care for the elderly. Autonomous vehicles might help people stay mobile. 3D printing and localized manufacturing might reduce the need for large supply chains. If the US embraces these shifts, it could not only survive demographic decline, but redefine what prosperity looks like. Yet, the clock is ticking. The decisions made today about immigration, family support, education, health, and technology will shape whether a shrinking population becomes a slow collapse or a graceful transition. Demography is not destiny, but it is a powerful force. Ignoring it would be a grave mistake. Ultimately, the story of a declining US population is not just about numbers. It's about values, priorities, and choices. Will the country adapt with wisdom and compassion, or resist change and suffer the consequences? The future is unwritten, but one thing is certain. America cannot afford to sleepwalk into demographic decline. The conversation must begin now, and it must be bold, inclusive, and imaginative. If the United States embraces innovation, inclusivity, and sustainability, a smaller population doesn't have to mean a smaller future. But if it clings to outdated models and denies the shift already underway, the consequences could be more profound than any economic recession or political crisis. It could mark the slow unraveling of a great experiment,